Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. On Fresh Red Kills, I talk about the things that I have recently read. Uh, Mostly things that I finished, some things I might be currently reading, but that's what I do in these episodes. It's my version of what some people do on Fridays for Friday reads. Other people have different names depending on what day of the week they decide to do these kinds of videos. I never know what day of the week I'm going to be doing it, so I just kind of have a blanket title, Fresh Red Kills, and that's where I talk about the thoughts that I have of the things that I've mostly just recently read. And today I have two. It's been a while since I've done one of these Fresh Red Kill videos because I've just been incredibly busy. So the things I'm going to be talking about, I read a few weeks ago. I have read things since then that I'm not going to talk about in this video because the things that I read were Star Trek novels. And I am a co-host of Book Trek 2021, where we are exploring Star Trek fiction. And for those books, I'm going to be making individual videos. So I'm going to talk about what I read up to that point when I started the Star Trek deep dive for the month of August. So these are actually things that I finished right at the very end of July. The first one is Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome, originally published in 1889. And this is not a book that was on my radar. I know that it's well known. I first found out about it from Mark over at Book Time with Elvis. This is one of his favorite books. Had a reputation for being very, very funny. And along the way, when we were doing the Euro reading challenge, a bunch of us in the Boxer group kind of decided, let's do a read along of this, especially if England won the Euros, this would be a good pick for that. They didn't, but we still all wanted to read along with this. So we did a Voxer read along. It's a fairly short book. I was playing a lot of catch up. I think, finished it on the day that everybody else was supposed to finish it. And this is kind of a slightly fictionalized memoir of Jerome. I think he just calls himself Jay in the book. And two of his friends, they decide that they're going to take a little boat trip down the Thames. To London and back. I'm a little bit iffy on some of the geography, but this was something that was very popular among the middle classes for leisure time, boating. And a lot of the humor of this comes from, sometimes they're just kind of oblivious. They can be a little bit idiotic sometimes. So some of the humor comes from that. Some of it, though, is the humor that I most appreciated. It's the kind of humor that you would get from, like, National Lampoon's Vacation, where they keep telling themselves, this is going to be so incredibly fun, right? And then half the time they're miserable. Just like the Griswolds, right? I kept thinking of Clark Griswold's rant to his kids when he kind of loses it, how they're going to have to, they're going to need surgery to wipe the smile off their blank and blank faces. And that's part of the humor here. There's a lot of hints from romanticism as well. With if we go back into nature, we'll kind of find ourselves. We will we'll improve ourselves somehow, and how great will it be for us to be these men kind of living out beneath the stars. And of course it's miserable. A lot of the humor comes from expectation versus reality. There is also one of the things that I kept thinking of is this idea of like the idle man. They're very lazy, and that's also where some of the humor comes from. They purposely will avoid any kind of difficult work, and they're convinced that they need this trip because they're overworked anyway. But they all seem to have fairly comfortable jobs. It made me wonder, when did the idle man become a hero? Not just appear in literature, but almost become the hero of the story, kind of like in a Big Lebowski sort of way. And so if anybody has any insight on that, I'd definitely love to hear. If you could, be kind enough to put that in the comments. But I'm curious about the idle man as hero. But yeah, there's some terrific humor. And every so often he kind of goes on a little bit of a romantic romantic sidetrack that actually has some pretty nice writing in it. There's a lot of callback humor. One of my favorites is how they talk about how they're in their little boat and they love getting in the way of steamboats that are on the river because it's usually the wealthy that have steamboats. They kind of take joy in this kind of class warfare that's going on the waterway, how they get in the way of these steamboats. But then later on in the book, when they're being pulled by a steamboat, he just kind of rails against how absolutely, unthinking and vile the people are who keep getting in the way of the steamboats and all the terrible things he'd love to do to them. So anyway, I'm sure that at some point I'll probably go back to this. I do see why Mark over at Book Time with Elvis does enjoy revisiting this over and over again. But yeah, really enjoyed this one. So 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. Excuse me. Another thing that I read, partly inspired by the read-along that Steve Donahue and Matt over at Mayberry Book Club were having of Batman Year One. And I have the original issues for that, the 4 issues, which are kind of Batman's origin story by Frank Miller. Much better written than The Dark Knight Returns. But this was enjoyable to go back to. But it did kind of whet my appetite for reading graphic novels again. So when I was on vacation down in Pennsylvania, I picked this up. Batman Damned. I am a big horror fan. And I specify by saying I'm a big horror film buff. I'm still kind of newer to horror fiction, and it's not something that I read all the time, but I do like to read it. But I wouldn't say that it makes up the majority of my reading diet. Actually, nonfiction does. But this really intrigued me. This is part of DC's Black Label. Their more mature line, kind of like what Vertigo used to be. I think more based on short-run books rather than longer series. And written by Brian Azzarello, who wrote a lot of Hellblazer, John Constantine comics. And that's really kind of what this is. I mean, this is a Batman horror novel, but it's really a John Constantine story. John Constantine is the one who narrates this, and this feels way more like a Hellblazer comic than it does like a Batman comic. It is definitely an Elseworld. It has no continuity with the rest of Batman. It's completely on its own. But the artwork is extraordinary in this thing. I mean, just striking. That's really one of the reasons I picked it up. See, Batman, I thought it was like an ectoplasm coming out. But so many, I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted by looking at these pages. This had controversy when it first came out. It did show some Batman nudity in the very first run. This does not have that. It's definitely been shadowed out. So that had a lot of kind of dumb controversy surrounding it. But I think that a lot of Batman fans weren't that crazy about it because, like I said, it's not exactly a Batman novel. It's really much more of a Hellblazer novel, just with Batman as a character, as a central character in it. But it's really much more of a psychological horror. And the artwork is incredible. I think there are some terrific moments in here. I like the story overall, but because it's kind of a psychological horror, it kind of follows that trend of psychological horror movies where, yes, Batman's perception is kind of being messed with, but so is the audience's, where you're not exactly sure what you're seeing, what to trust. So I think that could be frustrating for some readers who are not used to that. I think horror fans are a little more accustomed to that sort of thing. One of the things I had to kind of look up was who some of these characters were. There's a lot of, I mean, I think if you're a diehard DC fan, you're going to know who everybody is, but it's been a long time since I've read a lot of DC comics, and there were certain characters in here that I just didn't have enough of a background of to know exactly who they were and how they were different and what their powers were. So this is a book that I kind of had to do a little bit of research for at the end to really get everything that was going on. But I still enjoyed it. I would not necessarily recommend this to your average Batman fan, but I think that horror fans who like Batman might actually get much more of a kick out of this book. So that's kind of my qualified recommendation there. Some people have recently subscribed to my channel, and I think a lot of them subscribe with the expectation that I'm going to talk a lot of horror. And I don't always talk a lot of horror on my booktube channel. I do, like I said before, I love horror, but it's more of the horror films that I end up gravitating to and that I watch a lot. And I do co-host a horror movie discussion podcast. It's been going on for 5 or 6 years now, called the HORRORCAST. Fairly successful. We have a terrific audience. There's links for that inside the description if people want to check that out. I kind of get my fill talking about horror sometimes with the podcast. So I don't talk horror movies on this channel very often. But if I do come across a horror book, and I'm always looking for them, and they fit into my reading schedule, I certainly will talk about them on here. But if people are interested in horror films, I definitely recommend you check out our podcast. We look at both older horror films and newer horror films. It's quite a mix, and we do make it a point to have intelligent discussions about it, and well thought out. But anyway, that's it for this edition of Fresh Red Kills. All right, thank you, BookTube.